Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 76 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto. We're in the 26th chapter, which is titled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. And today we're continuing on from verse 33. So first of all, let us begin with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyas cha kripa sindhubhya eva cha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Right, so, chapter 26, Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, second section, Devahuti asks about, and Kapila explains, the characteristics of the Supreme Person. Right, so yes, that's where we are, and we are continuing on from verse 33. Persons who are learned and who have true knowledge define sound as that which conveys the idea of an object, indicates the presence of a speaker screened from our view, and constitutes the subtle form of ether. So we have a fairly substantial purport here. And first paragraph, so Prabhupada makes the point that when we speak of hearing, there must be a speaker, of course. Without a speaker, there's no question of hearing. So therefore, the Vedic knowledge, which is known as Shruti, or which means that which is received by hearing. So it's also called a Purusha, not spoken by any person materially created. So right in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam 1:1:1, it says, Tene Brahma Hrida, that the Veda was first impregnated into the heart of Brahma. So how did Brahma become learned? Generally, for someone to become learned, they have to hear a speaker. So who did he hear? Who did Brahma hear? Well, the knowledge was imparted to him by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as such, that knowledge is free from defects of material understanding, because the Lord doesn't have the four defects. If we hear from the conditioned soul, particularly if we hear what the conditioned soul thinks, the ideas of the conditioned soul, then it's undoubtedly full of defects, illusion, mistakes, cheating, imperfect senses. These, in a nutshell, these are the four defects of the conditioned soul. So, but if we receive that Vedic knowledge from Brahma in disciplic succession, then we we hear perfect knowledge. Right, so second paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point, every word we hear has a meaning behind it. As soon as we hear the word water, then there's the substance water is, you could say, behind it. Similarly, when we hear the word God, there's a meaning. And if we receive that meaning and the explanation of the word God from God, then it's perfect. If we just speculate about the meaning of God, it's imperfect. But if we hear from God his explanation and what is the meaning of God, then that's perfect. So, but otherwise, Bhagavad Gita is the science of God spoken by the Lord himself. So that's perfect knowledge. And otherwise, the speculators, so-called philosophers, who are trying to research what is God and who is God and how does it all work, then they'll never understand the nature of God. The science of God has to be understood in disciplic succession, particularly from Brahma, who was first instructed about the knowledge of God by God. We can understand the knowledge of God by hearing Bhagavad Gita from a person authorized in the disciplic succession. And there's very short last paragraph. I'll just read the thing. When we speak of seeing, there must be form. By our sense perception, the beginning experience is the sky. Sky is the beginning of form. And from the sky, other forms emanate. Therefore, the objects of knowledge and sense perception begin from the sky. Verse 34. The activities and characteristics of the ethereal element can be observed as accommodation for the room for the external and internal existences of all living entities, namely the field of activities of the vital air, the senses, and the mind. So, okay, let's have a look at the purport. Prabhupada begins the purport by saying the mind, the senses, and the vital force or the living entity, they all have forms, although they're not visible to the naked eye. Prabhupada continues, form exists in subtle existence in sky, internally perceived as veins in the body and the circulation of vital air. Wow, that's amazing. Externally, there are invisible forms of sense objects. What do you think of that? And the production of the invisible sense objects is the external activity of the ethereal element, ether, and the circulation of the vital air and blood is its internal activity. That subtle forms exist in the ether, Prabhupada says, has been proven by modern science by transmission of television, by which forms or photographs of one place are transmitted to another place by the action of the ethereal element. So this is all very nicely explained here. Prabhupada goes on to say, this verse is the potential basis of great scientific research work. And that is a sort of a mantra for Rasaraj Prabhu from the BI, the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He sees it as being like a very, like the practically foundational statement by Prabhupada regarding science and how to work with science in terms of Krishna consciousness. So, okay, why is it like that? For it explains how subtle forms are generated from the ethereal element, what their characteristics and actions are, and how the tangible elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth, air, fire, water, and earth, are manifest from the subtle form, because first is ether in terms of the process of creation. First is ether, then air comes, etc. Right, so the mental or psychological actions of thinking, feeling, and willing are also activities on the ethereal platform. And Prabhupada says the statement of Bhagavad Gita that the next birth is determined by the mental situation at death is also corroborated here. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, mental existence transforms into tangible form as soon as there's an opportunity due to contamination or development of the gross elements from subtle form. Verse 35, from ethereal existence which evolves from sound, the next transformation takes place under the impulse of time, and thus the subtle element touch, and thence the air and sense of touch become prominent. So Srila Prabhupada addresses this. There's a short purport that in the course of time, over time, when subtle forms are transformed into gross, they become the objects of touch. The objects of touch and the tactile sense, the sense which perceives touch, they also develop after this evolution in time. But sound is the first sense object to exhibit material existence. And from the perception of sound, touch perception evolves, and from touch perception, the perception of sight. That is the way of the gradual evolution of our perceptive objects. Okay, verse 36. Softness and hardness and cold and heat are the distinguishing attributes of touch, which is characterized as the subtle form of air. Tangibility is the proof of form. In actuality, objects are perceived in two different ways. They're either soft or hard, cold or hot, etc. This tangible action of the tactile sense is the result of the evolution of air, which is produced from the sky, and sky is a term synonym of ether. Okay, verse 37. The action of the air is exhibited in movements, mixing, allowing approach to the objects of sound and other sense perceptions, and providing for the proper functioning of all other senses. So Prabhupada makes the point, very straightforward but important point. We can perceive the action of the air when the branches of a tree move, or dry leaves collect together or get blown about, like that. And also, it's only by the action of air that a body moves. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Our bodies move, we can walk, etc., only because of the presence of air. And when air circulation is impeded, many diseases result. Paralysis, nervous breakdown, madness. Traditionally in Vedic society, any form of mental disturbance, even up to the level of insanity, is taken to be some deterioration of air within the body. So these things, paralysis, nervous breakdown, madness, Prabhupada says these things are due to insufficient circulation of air. So yeah, Prabhupada explains in the Ayurvedic system, these diseases are treated on the basis of air circulation. There's in fact, in Chaitanya Bhagavat at least, there's one pastime in which Lord Chaitanya, as a youngster, apparently becomes mad and starts breaking things and like that. And so a doctor was called, and he gave a treatment on the basis of adjusting the air circulation. So Prabhupada makes the point, if from the beginning we take care of the process of air circulation, such diseases won't happen. And Prabhupada then goes on to make the point that in Ayurveda, as well as Srimad Bhagavatam, it's clear that many activities are going on internally and externally because of air alone. And as soon as there's some deficiency in the air circulation, these activities cannot take place. So, but here it is clearly stated, Netrit Vam Dravya Shabdayo, that our sense of proprietorship over action is due to the activity of air. And if air circulation is stifled, we can't approach a place after hearing. If someone calls us, we hear the sound because of air circulation. And we approach that sound or the place from which the sound comes. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, it's clearly said in this verse that these are all movements of the air. The ability to detect odors is also due to the action of the air. On we go, verse 38. By interactions of the air and the sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. So Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, because of destiny, the touch sensation, the interactions of air, and the situation of the mind, which is produced of the ethereal element. Prabhupada says we transmigrate from one form to another by destiny and arrangements of higher authority who controls interaction of air and mental situation. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, form is the combination of different types of sense perception. Predestined activities are the plans of the mental situation and the interaction of air. Right, so now verse 39. My dear mother, the characteristics of form are understood by dimension, quality, and individuality. The form of fire is appreciated by its effulgence. So Srila Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, purport of verse 39, every form has its particular size and characteristics. The quality of an object is appreciated by its utility, but the form of sound is independent. Prabhupada says invisible forms can be understood only by touch. That is the independent appreciation of invisible form. Visible forms are understood by analyzing their constitutions. So the constitution of an object is appreciated by its internal action. For example, salt is appreciated by salty tastes, sugar by sweet tastes. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, tastes and qualitative constitution are the basic principles in understanding the form of an object. Fire is appreciated by its light and its ability to cook, to digest, to destroy cold, to evaporate, and to give rise to hunger, thirst, eating, and drinking. All right, anyway, let's go into the purport. The first symptoms of fire are distribution of light and heat. But fire is also perceived in the stomach. Without fire, we can't digest. And when there's insufficient hunger or thirst, it means there's a shortage of fire in the stomach. So, the idea of fire being there in the middle of the digestive process, it doesn't mean that there is an actual fire, but it means there's the presence of the fire element, generally actually via some secretions, some chemicals in the stomach particularly. Yeah, and those chemicals, they act on the food as fire acts. So when there's insufficient hunger or thirst, which means a shortage of fire in the stomach, the Ayurvedic treatment is Agni Mandyam, to stimulate the fire. So Srila Prabhupada says, since fire is increased by the secretion of bile, the treatment is to increase bile secretion. The Ayurvedic treatment thus corroborates the statements in Srimad Bhagavatam. Everyone knows how cold is subdued by fire. Oh yes. Verse 41, by the interaction of fire and the visual sensation, the subtle element taste evolves under a superior arrangement. From taste, water is produced, and the tongue, which perceives taste, is also manifested. So there is a really short purport. The tongue is described here as the instrument for acquiring knowledge of taste, because taste is a product of water. There's always saliva on the tongue. Okay. Verse 42. Although originally one, taste becomes manifold as astringent, sweet, bitter, pungent, sour, and salty due to contact with other substances. So there's no purport at all here. So we go on to verse 43. The characteristics of water are exhibited by its moistening other substances, coagulating various mixtures, causing satisfaction, maintaining life, softening things, driving away heat, incessantly supplying itself to reservoirs of water, and reflection and refreshing by slaking thirst, by satisfying thirst. So here we go. The purport, Prabhupada begins by saying, starvation can be mitigated by drinking water. It is sometimes found that if a person who has taken a vow to fast takes a little water at intervals, the exhaustion of fasting is at once mitigated. So, and the Vedas say, wow, this is powerful, apomaya prana, life depends on water. So with water, anything can be moistened or dampened. Flour dough can be prepared. mud is created by mixing earth with water. In the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it's stated that water is the cementing ingredient of different material elements. Water is the main constituent of bricks in house building. Fire, water, and air are the exchanging elements for the entire material manifestation, but water is most prominent. Excessive heat is reduced by pouring water on a field. So there you go, devotees. Now verse 44. Due to the interaction of water with the taste perception, the subtle element odor evolves under superior arrangement. Thence, the earth and the olfactory sense, by which we can variously experience the aroma of the earth, becomes manifest. 45. Odor, although one, becomes many, as mixed, offensive, fragrant, mild, strong, acidic, and so on, according to the proportions of associated substances. Yes, that's interesting. So Prabhupada, first thing he says is, mixed smell is sometimes perceived in foodstuffs prepared from various ingredients, such as vegetables mixed with different kinds of spices and asafoetida. Yes. Bad smells, bad odors are perceived in filthy places, very dirty places. Good smells are perceived from substances like camphor, menthol, etc. Pungent smells are perceived from garlic and onions. Ah, Krishna. Yeah. And acidic smells come from turmeric and other sour things. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the original aroma is the odor emanating from the earth. And when it's mixed with different substances, this odor appears in different ways. Depending on what it's mixed with, then the smell will basically change. Verse 46, the characteristics of the functions of earth can be perceived by modeling forms of the Supreme Brahman, by constructing places of residence, by preparing pots to contain water, etc. In other words, the earth is the place of sustenance for all elements. Okay. So Prabhupada in the purport makes the point, first of all, that different elements, such as sound, sky, air, fire, and water, can be perceived in the earth. Another feature of the earth, especially mentioned here, is that earth can manifest different forms of the Supreme Lord. So by the statement of Kapilas, it's confirmed that the Lord has innumerable forms which are described in Shastra. And by manipulation of earth and its products like wood, stone, jewels, these forms of the Lord can be present before our eyes. And when a form of the Lord is manifested as a deity or in the deity, it is not imaginary. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, the earth gives shape to the Lord's forms as described in the scriptures. Then we go on to the second paragraph Brahma Samhita describes Krishna's place, the variegatedness of his abode, the forms of the Lord playing a flute with his spiritual body. All these forms are described in Shastra, and when they're presented nicely, then those descriptions are worshipable. Sometimes there's in the verse itself, the word bhavana appears. It means, well, it's translated as bhavanam, as modeling forms, bhavanam. So sometimes Prabhupada says the word bhavana is misunderstood as imagination, but that's not what it means. It doesn't mean imagination, it means giving actual shape to the description of Vedic literatures. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Earth is the ultimate transformation of all living entities and their respective modes of material nature. So on we go to verse 47. The sense whose object of perception is sound is called the auditory sense, and that whose object of perception is touched is called the tactile sense. So Prabhupada gives very, very short purport. Let's just read it. Sound is one of the qualifications of the sky and is the subject matter for hearing. Similarly, touch is the qualification of the ear and is the subject of the touch sensation. So on we go to verse 48. The sense whose object of perception is form, the distinctive characteristic of fire, is a sense of sight. The sense whose object of perception is taste, the distinctive characteristic of water, is known as the sense of taste. Finally, the sense whose object of perception is odor, the distinctive characteristic of earth, is called the sense of smell. Verse 49, since the cause exists in its effect as well, the characteristics of the former are observed in the latter. In other words, the characteristics of the cause are observed in the effect. That is why the peculiarities of all the elements exist in the earth alone. How's that, devotees? For something profound. That is really deep. So therefore, Prabhupada explains in the purport that the sound is the cause of the sky, the sky is the cause of air is the cause of fire is the cause of water is the cause of the earth. Right. So the following applies. Listen to this. In the sky, there's only sound. In the air, there are sound and touch. In the fire, there are sound, touch, and form. In water, there are sound, touch, form, and taste. And in earth, there are sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. They're all there. So therefore, Prabhupada says, earth is the reservoir of all qualities of the other elements. It's the sum total of them. So, Prabhupada explains, earth has all the 5 qualities of the elements. Water has 4, fire has 3, air has 2, and the sky has only 1 quality. What's that? Sound. So verse 50, when all these elements were unmixed, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the origin of creation, along with time, work, and the qualities of the modes of material nature, entered into the universe with the total material energy in 7 divisions. So here's the purport, verse 50. After talking of generating the causes, Kapila Dev talks of the generation of the effects. So when the causes were unmixed, then the Lord as Garbhadakshay Vishnu entered each universe, and with him were all the 7 primary elements, the 5 material elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, the total energy, Mahatattva, and false ego. So this involves him entering the atoms of the material world as confirmed in Brahma Samhita verse 35. So he's not only within the universe, but he's within the atoms also, and the hearts of all living entities. This Brahma Samhita verse 35, if you look at the purport there, you'll see it's quoted, or part of it, and antarasta paramanu chayantarastam, which means that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is so small he enters the atoms. He is within the atoms. So therefore he's not only within the universe, but within the atoms also, and in the hearts of every living entity. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Garbhadakshay Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, entered into everything. Verse 51, from these 7 principles, mentioned in the purport of verse 50, from these 7 principles, roused into action and united by the presence of the Lord, an unintelligent egg arose, from which appeared the celebrated cosmic being. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? So, Prabhupada, in the purport here of verse 51, Prabhupada makes the point that the principle or the way, what happens through sex life, the same principle exists in the universal creation. Let's just go through what that means. That sex life, the combination of matter from the parents, which involves emulsification and secretion, then creates the situation whereby a soul is received within matter. And then that combination of matter gradually develops into a complete body. So Prabhupada says the same principle exists in the universal creation. The ingredients are present, but only when the Lord enters into the material elements is matter actually agitated, and then this is the cause of creation. And Prabhupada makes the point that we can see this in our ordinary experience, that although we may have clay, water, and fire, what you need to make a brick, but they take the shape of a brick only when we combine them, when we intervene to combine them. You don't see the clay, water, and fire independently mixing with each other, but only when we get into it and combine them. Therefore, Prabhupada makes the point that without the living energy, there's no possibility that matter can take shape. Similarly, the whole material world doesn't develop unless it's agitated by the Lord as the Virat Purusha, the universal form. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Yasmad udatishtad aso virat. By his agitation, space was created, and the universal form of the Lord also manifested. therein. Okay, verse 52. This universal egg, or the universe in the shape of an egg, is called the manifestation of material energy. Its layers of water, air, fire, sky, ego, and Mahatattva increase in thickness one after another. Each layer is 10 times bigger than the previous one, and the final outside layer is covered by pradhan. Within this egg is the universal form of Lord Hari, of whose body the 14 planetary systems are parts. Yes, right. Okay, so the universe is shaped like an egg, you could say, covered by a shell, and it has different layers. First of all, Prabhupada says the first layer is water, next is fire, then air, then sky, and the ultimate holding crust is pradhan. Within this egg-like universe is the universal form of the Lord as Virat Purusha. Yeah. And in that regard, all planetary systems are parts of his body, the Virat Purusha. This has, of course, already been explained in the second canto. So anyway, those who cannot grasp directly worshipping the transcendental form of the Lord can think of and worship the universal form, and different parts of it are then mentioned. That Patala, the lowest planetary system, is considered to be the soles of the feet of the Lord. The earth is the belly, Brahma Loka is the head. And onto the second paragraph of the purport of verse 52. So, Prabhupada says the Virat Purusha means the universal form is an incarnation of the Lord. The original form, of course, is Krishna, Adi Purusha. The Virat Rupa universal form is also Purusha, but not Adi Purusha, not the original Purusha. Anyway, so many forms of there are so many forms of the Lord. They're all Purushas, but they're not at the Adi Purusha. The Bhagavatam recommends that people who are on a lower level of understanding of the Lord may think of the universal form. That's advised in Srimad Bhagavatam. On to the third paragraph. So Prabhupada says the dimensions of the universe are estimated here. The outer covering is made of layers of water, air, fire, sky, ego, and Mahatattva. Each layer is 10 times greater than the one previous, and the space in the center, that's the inhabited universe, within the hollow of the universe, cannot be measured by any scientist or anyone else. And then beyond the hollow, there are the 7 coverings. And each one is 10 times greater than the one before. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, the dimensions are all inconceivable to the tiny brain of a human being, Krishna. So paragraph 4. This is a description of only one universe. And there are innumerable universes. And some of them are much, much bigger. This is actually considered, our universe is considered the smallest of all. And therefore, Brahma, in order to manage it, the brain power he only needs 4 heads. But in other universes which are much bigger than this one, then the Brahmas, they have to have more heads, and even many heads, hundreds of heads, or many heads. Yeah. Yeah, and Prabhupada refers to the incident described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in which all the Brahmas were called one day by Lord Krishna on the inquiry of our small four-headed Brahma, who had thought he was the greatest. But Krishna wanted to show him, you're not so great. So then Brahma, our four-headed Brahma, when he saw all these other Brahmas, none of which had only 4 heads, all of which had more than 4 heads, Prabhupada says he was thunderstruck. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, no one can measure the length and breadth of God by speculation or by false identification with God. These attempts are symptoms of lunacy. Hare Krishna. Verse 53, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Virat Purusha, situated himself in that golden egg which was lying on the water, and he divided it into many departments. There's no purport here. Verse 54. First of all, a mouth appeared in him, and then came forth the organ of speech, and with it the god of fire, the deity who presides over that organ. Then a pair of nostrils appeared, and in them appeared the olfactory sense, means, of course, the smelling sense, as well as prana, the vital air. So it's very short, 1-sentence purport. Let me read it. With the manifestation of speech, fire also became manifested, and with the manifestation of nostrils, the vital air, the breathing process, and the sense of smell also became manifested. Then verse 55. In the wake of the olfactory sense came the wind god who presides over that sense. Thereafter a pair of eyes appeared in the universal form, and in them the sense of sight. In the wake of this sense came the sun god who presides over it. Next there appeared in him a pair of ears, and in them the auditory sense, and in its wake the dig devatas, or the deities who preside over the directions. Okay, so we have a purport here, not so big. So this is a description, of course, of different of the bodily parts of the universal form and the presiding deities of those parts. And as in the womb of a mother, the body of the child develops, so does the universal form in the universal womb. Okay, the senses appear. Each one has a presiding deity. So this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam and also Brahma Samhita confirms that the sun appeared after the appearance of the eyes of the universal form. In other words, the sun is dependent on the eyes of the universal form. Brahma Samhita says the sun is the eye of the Lord. So anyway, everything's created by the universal body of the Lord. And material nature simply is the supplier of the materials. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by quoting part of Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 10, which we've seen quoted on really quite a number of cases already. So that verse, Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 10, confirms that the creation is done by the Lord. And so Prabhupada quotes the verse, or part of it, Maya jakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam. Under my direction does material nature create all moving and non-moving objects in the cosmic creation. Verse 56. Then the universal form of the Lord, the Virat Purusha, manifested his skin, and thereupon the hair, moustache, and beard appeared. After this, all the herbs and drugs became manifested, and then his genitals also appeared. It's a very short purport. The skin is the site of the touch sensation, means the place of the touch sensation. The demigods who control the production of herbs and medicinal drugs are the deities presiding over the tactile sense. Verse 57. After this, semen, the faculty of procreation, and the god who presides over the waters appeared. Next appeared an anus, and then the organs of defecation, and thereupon the god of death, who is feared throughout the universe. Okay, so let's have a look at the purport. Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, it is understood herewith that the faculty to discharge semen is the cause of death. Hare Krishna, how do you like that? So therefore the yogis, transcendentalists, who want to live for greater spans of life, they voluntarily restrain themselves from discharging semen. The more, Prabhupada continues, the more one can restrain himself from this, the more one can be aloof from death. There are many yogis who live 300 or 700 years by this process. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the more one is addicted to sexual enjoyment, the more susceptible he is to a quick death. So we'll do verse 58 and then we'll conclude. Thereafter the two hands of the universal form of the Lord became manifested, and with them the power of grasping and dropping things. And after that Lord Indra appeared. Next the legs became manifested, and with them the process of movement. And after that, Lord Vishnu appeared. So there is very short purport here. It's 2 sentences. I'll just read it. The deity presiding over the hands is Indra, and the presiding deity of movement is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. Vishnu appeared on the appearance of the legs of the Virat Purusha. Hare Krishna. Very interesting. Bit complicated, but very interesting. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.